Where's the easement? Changed everything. I locked my ranch gate before sunrise and figured I'd get a few angry phone calls. Instead, by breakfast, dozens of homeowners were stranded, contractors were turning around, and an HOA president was standing in front of my private road, calling 911 like I'd committed a crime. The problem was simple. She thought years of use made the road hers. I knew what the deed said. What happened next exposed a secret the entire neighborhood had been living with for years. And by the time the sheriff asked one question, everything started falling apart. If you've ever wondered what happens when assumptions collide with property records, stay with me, because this one only gets bigger from here. And before we get started, if you enjoy stories about land rights, HOA drama, and ordinary folks standing their ground with patience and proof, take a second to subscribe. We've got plenty more stories like this coming your way. I locked the gate at 6:14 in the morning, not because I was angry, not because I wanted a fight. I locked it because the deadline had expired 12 hours earlier, and after 6 months of warnings, letters, meetings, and legal notices, there was nothing left to discuss. The iron chain rattled once as I pulled it tight across Grayson Crossing Road. The sound echoed through the quiet ranch entrance. I slid the heavy lock into place, checked it twice, then stepped back. Done. A laminated notice hung in the center of the gate where nobody could miss it. Private Ranch Road. Unauthorized access terminated. Contact property attorney for questions. Simple, direct, legal. Exactly the way Rachel Whitaker had instructed. I took a sip of coffee from my thermos and looked down the road. The sun hadn't fully cleared the horizon yet. The lake beyond the oak trees reflected the first streaks of orange light. A few cattle moved along the shoreline pasture. Everything looked peaceful. It stayed that way for exactly 11 minutes. The first vehicle was a white landscaping truck. The driver slowed, stared at the barricade, then stopped. He climbed out and read the notice. Then he read it again. Finally, he looked toward me. "You serious?" he asked. "Very." He scratched his head. "I got a job in Cedar Ridge. Not today." The man looked annoyed, but not angry, mostly confused. That would change. By 7 o'clock, there were 8 vehicles backed up behind him. By 7:15, there were 15. At 7:30, the line stretched around the bend. Contractors, delivery vans, pool service companies, electricians, homeowners. Everyone who had spent years treating Grayson Crossing like public infrastructure had suddenly discovered it wasn't. Engines idled, doors slammed, people gathered in small groups, phones came out, the complaints started. I stayed beside the gate. Quiet. Watching. A woman in a jogging outfit approached first. "There has to be some mistake." "No mistake. My husband uses this road every day." I nodded. "I know. Then why are you blocking it?" "Because it isn't yours." I didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I pointed toward the notice. She read it. Her expression changed. Then she walked back toward the growing crowd. By 8 o'clock, the situation had become impossible to ignore. More than 40 vehicles were trapped on both sides of the closure. A delivery driver was arguing with a roofing contractor. Someone was yelling into a cell phone. 2 residents stood beside the gate taking photographs as if they were documenting a crime scene. The funny part was that nobody seemed interested in reading the actual notice. Everyone wanted explanations. Nobody wanted facts. Then I saw the white Lexus, right on schedule. The SUV came around the corner too fast, brakes biting hard as it reached the traffic line. The driver's door flew open. Monica Pierce stepped out, already angry. She wasn't surprised. That told me everything. She marched through the crowd without speaking to anyone. People moved out of her way automatically. HOA presidents get used to that. Monica wore a navy blazer despite the Texas heat already building across the valley. A phone was pressed against her ear. A leather folder was tucked under one arm, and the expression on her face suggested she believed this entire situation existed solely to inconvenience her. She stopped 10 feet from me. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I took another sip of coffee. "Morning, Monica." "Don't morning Monica me." Several residents moved closer. They wanted a show. Monica knew it. So did I. She pointed at the gate. "Remove this." "No." The answer landed harder than I expected. Maybe because it was so short. Maybe because she wasn't used to hearing it. For a second, she simply stared. Then her eyes narrowed. "You cannot block a community access road. Watch me." A few people exchanged glances. Someone lifted a phone higher. Monica stepped closer. "This road serves 86 households. This road serves my ranch. You are creating a public safety issue." "No." Her jaw tightened. Mine didn't. That seemed to bother her more than anything else. The crowd kept growing. More vehicles arrived. More people got out. Some looked angry. Others looked worried. Most looked confused. Monica finally turned toward the audience she'd gathered. Perfect. An audience was her favorite thing. She raised her voice. Everyone remained calm. Nobody looked calm. "I am handling this." That got a few skeptical looks. Then she lifted her phone. "If Mr. Grayson refuses to cooperate, we'll let law enforcement deal with it." There it was. The threat. The performance. The assumption that somebody else would force me to comply. She dialed 911 standing right in front of me, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes," she said. "A homeowner has illegally blocked the main access road to Cedar Ridge Estates." Pause. "No, he's refusing to move." Another pause. "Yes." Residents are trapped. I almost smiled. Interesting choice of words. Trapped. Monica continued describing the situation. One detail never appeared. Ownership. She never mentioned who owned the road. Not once. 23 minutes later, the first patrol vehicle arrived. The crowd immediately shifted. People stepped aside. Conversations stopped. A second unit followed less than a minute later. Then another. Sheriff Cole Ramsey didn't arrive with them. Just deputies. For now. The lead deputy climbed out and looked over the scene. Traffic. Crowd. Barricade. Legal notice. Then me. Recognition crossed his face. "Morning, Mr. Grayson." "Morning." Monica hurried toward him before he reached the gate. "Deputy, thank God you're here." The deputy listened politely. Monica launched into a speech. Public access, community hardship, safety concerns, neighborhood disruption. She talked for nearly 2 minutes without interruption. Then the deputy finally looked at me. "Sir?" I reached into my truck, pulled out a thick manila folder, and handed it to him. Nothing else, no speech, no argument, just paperwork. The deputy opened it. His eyebrows rose immediately. Deeds, surveys, county plats, recorded filings, certified copies. The crowd grew quieter with every page he turned. Monica noticed. For the first time that morning, uncertainty flickered across her face. Small, but real. The deputy kept reading. Then he called another officer over. Together they reviewed the documents while dispatch began checking records. Nobody said much. Nobody moved. The tension felt different now. Less anger. more anticipation. Monica folded her arms, trying to look confident, trying very hard. The deputy finally looked up. His expression had changed, and that was when I knew the day was about to become very interesting. Because the question everyone had been avoiding for years was finally about to be asked. Who actually owned Grayson Crossing Road? And unlike Monica Pierce, I already knew the answer. The deputy continued flipping through the documents while residents watched from both sides of the barricade. Nobody was yelling anymore. The crowd had shifted from outrage to curiosity. People sensed something important was happening. Monica sensed it too. The problem for her was that facts had finally entered the conversation. The deputy closed the folder and looked at me. These records go back a long way. They do, your families? 3 generations. He nodded and handed the documents to another deputy. Monica immediately stepped forward. Deputy, this road has served Cedar Ridge Estates for years. The deputy glanced at her. That doesn't answer the ownership question. For the first time all morning, Monica didn't have an immediate response. That silence was worth more than any argument, because ownership wasn't something you voted on. It wasn't something you repeated enough times until people believed it. Ownership lived in county records, and county records don't care about opinions. The deputies moved toward their vehicles to continue checking information with dispatch. Meanwhile, residents gathered into small groups. Questions started spreading. Real questions, not complaints. Questions. I heard one man ask his neighbor, "Wait, does Wade actually own the road?" Another answered, "I thought the HOA maintained it." A third person said, "That's what Monica always told us." Interesting. Always told us. Not proved. Told. There was a difference. A big one. Watching them reminded me how this whole mess had started. Years before Cedar Ridge Estates existed, Grayson Crossing Road was simply part of our ranch. My father built most of it himself. Back then, the land wasn't divided by developments and HOA boundaries. It was cattle country, lake country, working land. The road connected the main ranch house to the western pastures and the lake shoreline. Every truck, every tractor, every livestock trailer used it. When I was 12 years old, I helped repair drainage ditches along the lower section after a flood washed part of the shoulder away. When I was 21, I helped pave the first section near the entrance. When I was 48, I paid for resurfacing after a brutal drought cracked the pavement. Every improvement, every repair, every invoice came from my family. Nobody from Cedar Ridge Estates had contributed $1, mostly because Cedar Ridge didn't even exist yet. That changed 8 years ago. The development company purchased several hundred acres behind my property. At first, I didn't think much of it. Developers buy land all the time. Construction crews appeared. Survey markers went up. Road graders arrived. Then houses started appearing. Big houses. Expensive houses. The kind built for retirees looking for peaceful country views without actual country responsibilities. I had no issue with that. People have a right to live where they want. The problem started when traffic began showing up on Grayson Crossing. The first few drivers were easy mistakes. Delivery companies, contractors, utility workers. They'd stop when I explained the road was private. Most apologized. Most turned around. Then something changed. The mistakes became routine. Every week brought more vehicles, then more, then more. People no longer acted confused. They acted comfortable, as if they belonged there. That was what caught my attention. One afternoon, years before Monica and I ever argued, I stopped a moving truck near the lake entrance. The driver rolled down his window. "Can I help you?" I asked. "I'm delivering furniture to Cedar Ridge." Why are you using this road? He looked surprised. Because it's the neighborhood entrance. No, it isn't. The man frowned. That's not what they told us. That conversation stayed with me, not because of the driver, because of the wording. They. Who exactly was they? A few months later, I got my answer. Monica Pierce. Back then, she wasn't HOA president yet. Just another resident with strong opinions and a talent for convincing people she was right. I first met her at a community gathering hosted by the developer. She introduced herself like a politician working a campaign event. Confident, polished, always smiling. The kind of person who never seemed uncertain about anything. At one point, she gestured toward Grayson Crossing and said something that immediately caught my attention. One of the best features of this community is the private secondary access road. I remember looking at her, then looking at the road, then back at her. Because she had just described my property as an HOA amenity, I corrected her immediately. Politely. Publicly. It's not a community road. She smiled. The kind of smile people use when they don't actually accept what you've said. Oh, of course. Then she changed the subject. But the seed had already been planted. Over the following years, that seed grew. Residents began referring to Grayson Crossing as an access route, then a neighborhood road, then a community connector. Each version moved a little farther from reality. And each time Monica was somewhere nearby encouraging the misunderstanding. At first I assumed it was ignorance, then I assumed it was arrogance. Eventually I realized it was strategy. The crowd near the gate pulled me back to the present. Monica was speaking quietly with several residents, trying to maintain control, trying to reassure people, trying very hard. Then one resident asked a question loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. If the road belongs to Wade, why have we been using it all these years? Nobody answered. Not Monica. Not the board members standing behind her. Nobody. Because that question led directly to another one, and that second question was far more dangerous. If Grayson Crossing never belonged to Cedar Ridge Estates, then why had everyone been told it did? I watched Monica's expression tighten. Just for a second. But it was there. And for the first time since the barricades went up, I thought she might actually be worried. Because the truth wasn't coming. The truth had already arrived. And this was only the beginning. The crowd remained gathered around the barricade, but the mood had changed. An hour earlier, most of them were angry at me. Now they were looking at Monica, not with hostility, with uncertainty. And uncertainty is dangerous when your authority depends on people believing you. One of the deputies stepped away from his patrol vehicle and spoke quietly into his radio. Another continued reviewing copies of the records I'd provided. Monica didn't like that. She especially didn't like that nobody was listening to her anymore. So she tried to regain control. "This is being blown out of proportion," she announced loudly. "We've used this road for years." A few residents nodded, but fewer than before. Because someone immediately asked the obvious question. Did we actually have permission? Monica ignored him. That answer told its own story. I watched the exchange from beside my truck. The funny thing about facts is they don't need defending once people start asking the right questions. Eventually, the deputies informed everyone that ownership verification was still ongoing and that nobody would be forcing the gate open. That announcement hit the crowd harder than Monica's entire speech. Several residents left. Others stayed. Most looked frustrated. But frustration wasn't my problem. For years, I'd tried solving this privately. For years, nobody wanted to listen. The situation hadn't reached this point overnight. It had happened inch by inch. boundary by boundary, assumption by assumption. The first real warning came almost 3 years earlier. I remember pulling my pickup down to the lower lake pasture one morning and finding fresh tire tracks cutting through the grass. Not ranch vehicles, not mine. The tracks led straight to a private fishing area on the western shoreline. When I followed them, I found 2 men unloading coolers from an SUV. Neither belonged there. "Can I help you?" I asked. One smiled. "We're with Cedar Ridge." That was apparently supposed to explain everything. It didn't. "You're on private property." The smile disappeared. "No, we're not." I still remember that answer. Not because it was rude, because he genuinely believed it. The man wasn't lying. He'd been told something, and whatever he'd been told was wrong. After I explained ownership, both men left without causing trouble. But the incident bothered me. A lot. Because confusion on that scale doesn't happen by accident. Then came the contractors, electricians, pool installers, landscaping companies. Every month brought more traffic. Every month brought more assumptions. One landscaping crew drove a trailer straight through a section of fencing near my southern pasture. Nearly $8,000 in damage. The foreman apologized immediately. I thought this belonged to the neighborhood. There it was again. The same sentence, over and over, like everyone had attended the same meeting. Months later, I discovered they probably had. The first official sign appeared shortly after Monica became HOA president. I noticed it while driving home from town. A small green marker had been installed near the entrance of Grayson Crossing. Nothing flashy, just enough to catch attention. It read, "Cedar Ridge Secondary Access Route." I stared at it for a full minute. Then I removed it. The next morning, another one appeared. Same wording, same placement, different sign. That told me everything I needed to know. Somebody wasn't making a mistake. Somebody was making a statement. I drove directly to the HOA office. Monica was waiting in the lobby speaking with 2 board members. The moment she saw the sign in my hand, her smile tightened. "We need to talk." She glanced at the sign. "About what?" I placed it on the desk. "My property. It helps residents navigate. It helps residents trespass." One board member suddenly became fascinated by a brochure rack. The other pretended to check emails. Nobody wanted to participate. Monica folded her arms. "The road serves the community. The road serves my ranch. We're trying to improve access. You don't own the access." For a moment, her expression hardened. Then the smile returned. That smile again. The one she used whenever facts became inconvenient. "We'll have to disagree." That sentence stayed with me, not because of the words, because of the arrogance behind them. Ownership wasn't something people disagreed about. Ownership was documented, recorded, verified. Yet Monica kept behaving as though reality were negotiable, and people followed her lead. Over time, things escalated. Residents began jogging along private shoreline trails. Boats appeared at fishing areas. Delivery services ignored posted signs. One family even scheduled engagement photos beside my lake without asking permission. The photographer seemed shocked when I interrupted. "We got approval." "From who?" "The HOA." That answer nearly made me laugh. The HOA couldn't approve use of property it didn't own. But by then, Cedar Ridge residents had stopped seeing Grayson Crossing as mine. The road had become something else. A convenience, an expectation, and eventually, an entitlement. Back at the barricade, I noticed Monica speaking urgently with several board members. Whatever confidence she'd arrived with was fading. People were asking questions she couldn't easily answer. Questions about ownership, questions about permission, questions about responsibility. And those questions were growing. Because once people realize they've been told the wrong story, they start wondering what else might not be true. The deputy returned from his vehicle and handed the folder back to me. Interesting records. I nodded. They get more interesting. His expression suggested he believed me. Monica saw the exchange, and for the first time all morning, she looked genuinely concerned. Because ownership wasn't the only secret hidden inside those records. Not even close. And soon, an entirely different question was about to emerge. If the HOA didn't own the road, why had they been collecting money for it? That question didn't appear the day I closed the gate. It appeared months earlier. And once I found the answer, everything changed. The first clue came from a conversation at the county feed store. I was loading fencing supplies into my truck when a Cedar Ridge resident named Ethan Brooks walked up beside me. Ethan wasn't one of Monica's loyal followers. He mostly kept to himself. But that afternoon, he looked irritated. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." He glanced around before lowering his voice. "Have you ever heard of something called a road improvement assessment?" That got my attention immediately. "No." Ethan frowned. "We've been paying it for almost 2 years. I stopped loading fence posts. What exactly is it supposed to improve?" "The access roads." That answer stayed with me all the way home, because there was only one road Cedar Ridge residents constantly talked about. Grayson Crossing. My road. The next morning I started digging. Public HOA records weren't difficult to obtain. Meeting summaries, budget reports, financial statements. Most of it was boring, until it wasn't. 3 hours into my review, I found the first reference. Road Improvement Assessment. Monthly fee. Applied to every homeowner. The total collected wasn't small, not even close. Over 2 years, the HOA had brought in well over $200,000. I stared at the number. Then I looked at the description. Infrastructure planning, access improvements, transportation management. The wording sounded impressive. The problem was that none of it explained where the money had gone, because I knew one thing for certain. It hadn't gone into Grayson Crossing. I paid every maintenance bill myself, every resurfacing invoice, every drainage repair, every culvert replacement, every shoulder stabilization project. I had receipts going back years. The HOA hadn't contributed $1, which raised an uncomfortable possibility. What exactly were residents paying for? That was when I called Rachel Whitaker. Rachel specialized in property disputes. She also had a habit of becoming very interested whenever paperwork stopped making sense. 3 days later, we sat in her office reviewing the records. She flipped through pages quietly, then stopped, backed up, read something again. "What is it?" Rachel tapped a section of the budget report. This wording. I leaned closer. Road Access Planning Initiative. What's wrong with it? Nothing. She smiled. That's the problem. I knew that smile. It meant she'd found something. The language is deliberately vague. So? So people write vague language when specific language creates liability. That wasn't encouraging. Over the next several weeks, Rachel and I dug deeper. The more records we reviewed, the stranger things became. Board meeting summaries referenced transportation planning, access management, community routing, traffic strategy, always indirect, always careful, never explicit. Nobody ever wrote, "We are collecting money for Wade Grayson's road." Instead, they danced around it. The legal equivalent of tiptoeing through a minefield. Then Rachel found something that changed everything. An archived board meeting packet, buried near the back. 3 years old. Easy to miss. Except Rachel didn't miss things. She slid the document across her desk. "Read this," I did. Twice. Then a third time. My pulse actually increased. The discussion involved future access planning for Cedar Ridge Estates. Most of it was routine. One paragraph wasn't. It described Grayson Crossing as privately owned property currently serving as the community's preferred secondary access route. I looked up. Rachel was watching me. "Did you catch it?" I nodded slowly. They knew exactly. The board knew the road was private, not suspected, not assumed. Knew the document couldn't have been clearer. And Monica's signature sat right at the bottom of the page. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Because the significance was enormous. This wasn't confusion anymore. It wasn't misunderstanding. The HOA leadership had documented awareness that Grayson Crossing belonged to someone else. Me. Yet the assessments continued. The newsletters continued. The access claims continued. Everything continued. Rachel leaned back. "This changes the entire case." "How?" "Intent." One word. Very powerful word. Because mistakes are treated differently than decisions. And this no longer looked like a mistake. The following week, another document surfaced. Then another. Then another. Board discussions. Planning notes. Committee summaries. Each one adding another piece. Each one making Monica's position worse. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Internally, the HOA acknowledged private ownership. Externally, they encouraged residents to believe otherwise. Two different stories, one for records, one for homeowners, and eventually those stories collided. Back at the barricade, I watched Monica standing near several frustrated residents. She still looked confident from a distance, but I knew something they didn't. I knew what was hidden inside the records. I knew what Rachel had found. And most importantly, I knew Monica knew. Not suspected, not guessed. Knew. The crowd around her kept growing. Questions were spreading. Ownership, access, responsibility, money, especially money. Because once people discover they've been paying fees based on assumptions, they start demanding answers. And answers were becoming very dangerous for Monica Pierce. The road dispute wasn't just about property anymore. It was about deception. And the documents proving it were already sitting inside Rachel Whitaker's office. Waiting. The question wasn't whether Monica had a problem. The question was how big the problem actually was. Rachel intended to find out. 2 days after discovering the board packet, she called me into her office. The conference table was covered with documents, budget reports, property records, meeting minutes, county filings, stacks and stacks of paper. Rachel pointed to the growing pile. "Most people think lawsuits are built in courtrooms." I sat down. "They aren't? They're built right here." She tapped the documents. "Long before anyone sees a courtroom." That was exactly what we were doing. Building, carefully, methodically, legally. Because if Monica wanted to fight over ownership, we weren't going to beat her with opinions. We were going to at her with evidence. Over the next several weeks, Rachel and I reviewed everything connected to Grayson Crossing. Every maintenance invoice, every resurfacing contract, every drainage repair, every utility easement, every county map, every survey revision. The deeper we dug, the stronger the paper trail became. One thing remained consistent throughout every document. The owner was always the same. Wade Grayson. Not Cedar Ridge Estates, not the HOA, not Monica Pierce. Me. Meanwhile, Rachel pursued another angle. She wanted to know how Cedar Ridge had been designed in the first place. That investigation led us to county planning records. The answer was buried inside an old development application, a preliminary site plan, the kind nobody looks at once construction begins, except Rachel. Rachel looked at everything. She spread the map across her desk. Take a look. I leaned forward, immediately saw it. A road. Not Grayson Crossing. Another road. Planned years before the subdivision was built. The route connected Cedar Ridge directly to a state-maintained highway east of the development. A completely independent entrance. Exactly what the neighborhood should have had. What happened to it? Rachel shrugged. We're still figuring that out. The discovery changed everything, because it proved something important. The original developers knew Grayson Crossing wasn't theirs. Otherwise, they never would have designed an alternative entrance. Someone had understood the ownership issue from the beginning. The next question was obvious. Why abandon the plan? A week later, we got the answer. Money. Of course it was money. Construction estimates showed the eastern access road would have required substantial grading and bridge work. Expensive work. The developer found a cheaper solution. Use Grayson Crossing. Not legally, not formally, just practically. The more we uncovered, the clearer the picture became. The neighborhood had been built around convenience. Then convenience became expectation. Then expectation became entitlement. And eventually entitlement became policy. The problem for Monica was that none of those things created ownership. One afternoon, Rachel received an unexpected package. No return address, no name, just a large envelope delivered to her office. Inside were photocopies of HOA records, internal records, not public records, board records, committee notes, emails. Someone inside Cedar Ridge had decided to talk. Rachel called me immediately. You need to see this. I arrived 20 minutes later. She slid several pages across the table. The first document wasn't remarkable. The second wasn't either. The third stopped me cold. Meeting notes, 4 years old, Monica present, several board members present. One sentence highlighted in yellow. Grayson Crossing remains privately owned but continues serving resident access needs. I read it twice. Then again. The wording couldn't be clearer. Privately owned, not disputed, not uncertain. Privately owned. Rachel nodded. They knew. They absolutely knew. The next document was even worse. An internal planning memo discussing future transportation strategy. One recommendation read, continue utilizing Grayson Crossing while long-term alternatives remain financially impractical. I looked up. Rachel looked back. Neither of us needed to say it. The board understood exactly what they were doing. The road wasn't theirs. It never had been. Yet they kept using it. Kept encouraging residents to use it. Kept collecting money connected to access planning, and apparently hoped nobody would ever challenge them. That hope was running out. Fast. A few days later, Ethan Brooks called me directly. His voice sounded nervous. Wade, I think people are starting to notice. What do you mean? Questions. Questions. That word again. Apparently, residents had begun asking about the road improvement assessments. Some wanted financial explanations. Others wanted project details. Several homeowners wanted to know what exactly their money had funded. According to Ethan, Monica's answers were becoming increasingly vague. That wasn't surprising. Specific answers tend to create specific problems, especially when records exist. The following week, Rachel finalized the first phase of our case. She organized everything into binders: ownership records, survey evidence, maintenance history, development plans, board documents, financial records. Each section strengthened the next. The result was devastating. Not emotionally, legally, exactly where it mattered. Rachel closed the final binder and looked at me. "We're ready for..." "For what?" she smiled. "To give them one last chance." One last chance, that was important. Because contrary to what Monica liked telling people, I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for compliance. The law gives people opportunities to fix mistakes, even expensive mistakes. Rachel intended to give Cedar Ridge that opportunity. The question was whether Monica Pierce would recognize it, or whether she'd convince herself she could simply ignore the truth one more time. Very soon, we'd find out. Rachel sent the notices on a Monday. Not emails, not phone calls. Certified legal notices with tracking numbers, signatures, and delivery confirmations. One copy went to Monica Pierce. One went to every HOA board member. One went to the HOA attorney. Additional copies went to county officials and the sheriff's office. Nobody would be able to claim they hadn't been warned. The notice was straightforward. Grayson Crossing Road was private property. No easement existed. No access rights existed. Unauthorized use would terminate on a specific date. The date was 30 days away. Rachel deliberately made it impossible to misunderstand. Then we waited. 3 days later, Monica responded. Not through an attorney, not through documentation, through a community newsletter. The headline alone told me everything. Clarification regarding access route concerns. I read the entire thing twice. The newsletter never challenged ownership, never mentioned deeds, never mentioned surveys, never mentioned easements. Instead, it focused on words like cooperation, community interests, neighborhood expectations, and ongoing discussions. Rachel laughed when she saw it. Notice what's missing? Evidence. Exactly, because evidence was the one thing they didn't have. Over the next week, traffic continued exactly as before. Contractors still used the road. Residents still treated it like community property. The difference was that now every vehicle crossing Grayson Crossing did so after receiving notice. That mattered. Legally, it mattered a lot. Meanwhile, Monica became more aggressive. At an HOA meeting, she assured residents the situation was under control. According to Ethan Brooks, several homeowners asked direct questions. Who owned the road? Was there an easement? What would happen if access was closed? Monica's answers were vague. Very vague. Ethan later called me. People aren't buying it anymore. What changed? The notices. That didn't surprise me. Documents have a funny effect on people, especially when they arrive by certified mail. They make problems feel real. 2 weeks before the deadline, Rachel received a response from the HOA attorney. 6 pages, expensive paper, complicated language, very little substance. The attorney discussed community reliance, historical usage, resident expectations, safety concerns, everything except ownership. Rachel finished reading and slid the letter across her desk. They still don't have an easement. No. They still don't have access rights. No. She smiled. Good. The letter actually helped us, because it confirmed what we already suspected. If evidence existed, they would have produced it immediately. Instead, they were arguing inconvenience. Inconvenience doesn't create ownership. The deadline moved closer. 20 days, then 15, then 10. Each day brought more questions inside Cedar Ridge. Ethan kept hearing them. Homeowners wanted answers about the road improvement assessments. They wanted explanations about access planning. Most importantly, They wanted certainty. Monica couldn't give it, because certainty requires facts, and facts were becoming dangerous. A week before the deadline, I encountered Monica face to face. She arrived at the ranch entrance while I was repairing a section of fence. The moment she stepped out of her Lexus, I knew she was angry. Not loud angry, controlled angry, the kind that hides behind a smile. "We need to talk." I kept working. "We already did." She crossed her arms. "You aren't seriously planning to close that road." "I am." Her expression hardened. "You're punishing an entire community." "No." I stood and faced her. "I'm enforcing a property boundary. After all these years, after all these warnings." That landed. She looked away briefly, then tried another angle. "This will create enormous problems." "I know. People depend on that road. That's not my decision." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Monica made a mistake. A small one, but important. "This isn't how communities work." I nodded. "Neither is collecting fees for property you don't own." The color drained from her face. Just slightly. But enough. Enough to tell me she'd heard the rumors spreading through Cedar Ridge. Enough to tell me she knew residents were asking questions. She recovered quickly. "We'll handle that internally." That answer was revealing. Not because of what she said, because of what she didn't deny. The deadline arrived faster than anyone expected. The day before closure, traffic remained steady. Residents continued using Grayson Crossing. Contractors continued crossing. Nothing changed, which was exactly what worried Rachel. "They still think you're bluffing." She was right. The HOA had spent years operating as though ownership didn't matter. Why would they suddenly believe it mattered now? That night I walked the length of the road one final time. Not for nostalgia, for certainty. Every survey marker was where it belonged. Every boundary was documented. Every notice had been delivered. Every legal requirement had been satisfied. There was nothing left to do. The following morning, before sunrise, I would close the gate, and when people arrived expecting another warning, they were going to find something very different, because the time for warnings was over. The time for consequences had finally arrived. At 6:14 that morning, I locked the gate. By 7 o'clock, vehicles were already backing up along Grayson Crossing. By 8 o'clock, the situation had become impossible to ignore. And by 8:30, Monica Pierce was standing in front of a crowd of angry residents, holding a phone to her ear and telling a 911 dispatcher that I was creating a public safety emergency. The irony was almost impressive. For months, she'd ignored certified notices, ignored county records, ignored legal warnings. Now she wanted government intervention. The same government records she'd spent years pretending didn't exist. Around us, the traffic line kept growing. Contractors checked their watches. Delivery drivers called customers. Residents stepped out of SUVs and golf carts. Phones pointed toward the gate from every direction. Monica loved an audience. Unfortunately for her, this audience wasn't hearing the script she expected. When the first deputy arrived, she practically ran to him. "Thank goodness you're here." The deputy listened. Monica talked. She talked about access. She talked about safety. She talked about community hardship. She talked about inconvenience. What she never talked about was ownership, because ownership was where her story fell apart. The deputy eventually turned toward me. I handed him the folder. The same folder Rachel and I had spent weeks building. Certified deeds, surveys, maintenance records, county filings, copies of every notice delivered to the HOA, copies of every response, copies of every document proving Grayson Crossing belonged to exactly one person. Me. The deputy began reading. A second deputy joined him, then a third. The crowd grew quieter with every page they reviewed. Monica noticed. So she tried changing tactics. This road serves 86 homes. Nobody responded. The deputies kept reading. We have residents trapped inside the neighborhood. Still nothing. The deputies kept reading. The HOA has relied on this road for years. That finally earned a response. Not from me. From one of the deputies. Reliance isn't ownership, ma'am. A few people in the crowd exchanged looks. The atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough that people started paying attention to the wrong person. Monica. That was a problem for her. Because the longer this continued, the more questions residents started asking. One homeowner stepped forward. Monica, do we actually have an easement? She ignored him. Another spoke up. Did the HOA ever purchase access rights? No answer. A third resident looked genuinely concerned. What happens if Wade owns the road? Monica immediately jumped in. That's not the issue. The moment she said it, I knew she'd lost control. Because ownership was exactly the issue. The deputies moved back toward their vehicles. Dispatch was checking county records, survey records, road classifications, property filings, everything Rachel predicted they'd check. Monica stood beside the gate with her arms crossed, trying to project confidence, trying very hard. I recognized the expression. It was the look people get when they're waiting for facts they already know they won't like. 20 minutes later, another vehicle arrived. Sheriff Cole Ramsey. Unlike the deputies, Ramsey already knew part of the story. Rachel had made sure of that. He stepped out of his truck and immediately walked toward the barricade. No speeches, no drama, just business. Morning, Wade. Morning, Sheriff. He nodded toward the crowd. Looks busy. A little. Monica approached before he could say anything else. Sheriff, this situation needs to be resolved immediately. Ramsey looked at her, then at the gate, then at the folder. Has ownership been verified? The question landed like a hammer. Not because it was aggressive, because it was simple. Monica hesitated, just long enough for everyone to notice. Ramsey accepted the documents from one of the deputies and began reviewing them himself. Several minutes passed. Nobody interrupted. Nobody wanted to. Even the crowd seemed to understand that something important was happening. The only sounds were idling engines and pages turning. Finally, Ramsey closed the folder. His expression revealed nothing. That made Monica nervous. I could see it. Then his radio crackled. Dispatch. Everyone nearby fell silent. The deputy listened carefully, asked 2 follow-up questions, waited, then nodded. Slowly. Very slowly. He looked at Sheriff Ramsey. Ramsey looked back. The deputy spoke quietly, but not quietly enough. I heard every word. County records confirm private ownership. The crowd froze. Monica froze. And for the first time all morning, nobody seemed interested in arguing anymore, because the conversation had just changed. This wasn't about traffic, or inconvenience, or community expectations. This was about evidence, and evidence was winning. Sheriff Ramsey turned toward Monica. His next question would change everything, because it was the one question Rachel had predicted from the beginning, the one question Monica could never answer. Do you have a recorded easement? And suddenly, 86 homeowners were waiting to hear her response. Monica blinked. Once. Twice. Then she opened the leather folder she'd been carrying all morning. The movement looked confident. The expression didn't. She began flipping through documents, board resolutions, community newsletters, budget reports, meeting summaries, page after page. The problem was obvious. She wasn't looking for an easement. She was looking for something that could replace one. Something official enough to sound convincing. Something that might distract people from the fact that she didn't have what the sheriff asked for. Sheriff Ramsey waited. Patiently. The crowd waited too. Nobody interrupted. Nobody helped. Because everyone understood the significance of the question. Ownership disputes can be complicated. That question wasn't. Do you have a recorded easement? Yes or no? Monica kept turning pages. Finally, she held up several documents. We have years of community records showing continuous use. Ramsey glanced at the papers, then handed them back. That isn't an easement. The silence deepened. A homeowner near the front spoke up. So there isn't one? Monica ignored him. Another resident raised her voice. Monica, is there an easement or not? Still no answer. That was the moment everything began unraveling. Not because of anything I said, because people started connecting the dots themselves. The newsletters, the assessments, the road signs, the claims, the promises. All of it suddenly looked very different. The deputy's radio crackled again. Everyone turned. Dispatch had completed additional verification. Property records, county maps, road classifications. The deputy listened for nearly a minute, then nodded. When he looked up, his expression had changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough that several people immediately noticed. Sheriff Ramsey folded his arms. What did they find? The deputy answered clearly. County records show no public dedication. A few people exchanged worried glances. He continued. No recorded access agreement benefiting Cedar Ridge Estates. More silence. No easement associated with Grayson Crossing Road. Monica's face tightened. The deputy wasn't finished. The road remains privately owned by Wade Grayson, according to current county filings. That was it. The final piece. The confirmation. The official answer. Everything Monica had spent years implying collapsed in less than 30 seconds. Nobody shouted. Nobody cheered. The reaction was far worse. People simply stopped believing her. One resident looked genuinely stunned. Another shook his head. A contractor quietly returned to his truck. Several homeowners stared at Monica as if seeing her for the first time. Because trust doesn't disappear all at once. It cracks, then breaks, then suddenly it's gone. A man near the front finally asked the question everyone was thinking. If the road belongs to Wade, why were we told it was part of the community? Nobody answered. Not Monica. Not the board members standing behind her. Nobody. Sheriff Ramsey looked toward Monica. Ma'am, based on the records we've reviewed, Mr. Grayson appears to be acting within his property rights. Appears. A careful word. A professional word. But everyone understood what it meant. The deputies weren't going to remove the gate. They weren't going to force access. They weren't going to rescue the HOA from a problem it had created itself. Monica tried one last argument. This creates hardship for residents. Ramsey nodded. I understand. Then something needs to be done. It should have been done before today. That landed harder than anything else he'd said, because it was true. This situation hadn't appeared overnight. The notices, the meetings, the warnings, the attorney letters. Monica had received all of them. She had chosen not to act. Now the consequences were parked in a traffic jam behind her. The crowd slowly began changing shape. Residents stopped standing beside Monica. Some moved away. Others gathered into separate conversations. Small groups. Private discussions. Questions. Lots of questions. Questions Monica could no longer control. I noticed Ethan Brooks standing near the back. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Monica. And the expression on his face told me something important. He'd reached a conclusion. Probably the same conclusion many others were reaching. The road wasn't the real story anymore. The real story was what people had been told about the road, and whether they had been told the truth. Sheriff Ramsey returned the folder to me. "Looks like you've got your documentation in order." Rachel made sure of that. He nodded. "Good attorney." "Very." The deputies began clearing the scene. Not because the dispute was unresolved, because it wasn't. At least not legally. Ownership had been established. The gate stayed closed. The records stayed valid. The facts stayed the facts. As vehicles slowly started turning around, the crowd began dispersing. But the silence remained. A different kind of silence. Not confusion, not uncertainty. The silence that follows a realization. The silence that arrives when people discover the story they've been hearing for years isn't true. And as Monica stood beside the barricade watching her authority disappear, one resident at a time, I realized the hardest part of her day hadn't happened yet, because the road closure was temporary. The questions waiting inside Cedar Ridge Estates were not. The first HOA meeting after the gate closure broke attendance records. I didn't need to be there to know it was bad. Ethan Brooks called me the next morning. His first sentence told me everything. "People are furious." "At me?" He laughed. "No." That was the moment I knew the fight had entered a new phase. The road had never been the real threat to Monica Pierce. The truth was, according to Ethan, homeowners packed the clubhouse meeting room an hour before the meeting started. Some stood along the walls. Others filled the hallway outside. For years, board meetings had attracted a handful of residents. Now nearly everyone wanted answers. The first questions were predictable. Why wasn't the road available? Why hadn't the HOA secured access rights? Why had the board ignored the legal notices? Then came the dangerous questions. The money questions. Several homeowners demanded an explanation for the road improvement assessments. What exactly had the HOA done with the money? What projects had been completed? What infrastructure had been improved? The answers weren't going well, because there weren't many answers to give. A few days later, Ethan asked to meet in person. We sat at a diner outside town. He arrived carrying a thick envelope. He placed it on the table. "What is this?" "Things people are starting to find." That got my attention. Inside were copies of board communications, internal planning documents, committee reports, the kind of records that rarely leave HOA offices. I recognized several names immediately. Board members, committee chairs. Monica. Page after page showed the same pattern. Private discussions acknowledging that Grayson Crossing belonged to me. Private discussions discussing alternatives. Private discussions recognizing the lack of legal access rights. Yet none of those concerns ever appeared in public communications. The residents had been told one story. The board had discussed another. That distinction mattered. A lot. Rachel thought so too. When I showed her the documents, she spent nearly an hour reviewing them. Then she pointed to a paragraph buried inside a transportation planning report. "This one." I leaned closer. The sentence was short, but devastating. "Continue utilizing Grayson Crossing until permanent access solutions become financially viable." I read it again, then again. There it was. In plain language, the board knew the road wasn't theirs. The board knew alternatives were necessary. The board knew the situation was temporary. Yet they continued acting as if ownership didn't matter. Rachel smiled, not because she was happy, because she recognized evidence when she saw it. That's awareness. Meaning they understood the risk. A week later, an independent audit began inside Cedar Ridge. Residents demanded it. Board members couldn't stop it. Too many questions. Too much pressure. Too many documents. The findings arrived faster than anyone expected. Financial inconsistencies. Planning decisions built around assumptions. Assessments connected to access strategies that never existed. Nothing criminal, but plenty embarrassing. And embarrassment spreads quickly when money is involved, especially other people's money. Then came the final blow, a special homeowner vote. Attendance shattered every previous record. By then, Monica's authority had collapsed, not because someone exposed a secret, because the records exposed a pattern. The homeowners weren't looking at rumors anymore. They were looking at documents. The same mistake Monica had made from the beginning. She underestimated paperwork. The vote wasn't close. Monica Pierce lost her position as HOA president. Several board members resigned within weeks. Others quietly stepped away from committees. Nobody wanted ownership of the disaster anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, people fought over ownership of my road. Now nobody wanted ownership of the consequences. Meanwhile, Rachel continued moving forward. Trespass claims, property damage claims, infrastructure recovery costs, fence repairs, drainage repairs, survey expenses. Nothing dramatic, nothing theatrical. Just organized evidence. The kind courts appreciate. The kind insurance companies understand. The kind attorneys rarely enjoy defending against. One evening, Ethan called again. This time he sounded relieved. It's over. No. I looked out toward the lake. It's just changing. Because Monica losing her position wasn't the ending. It was the result. The real ending would come when Cedar Ridge finally built the access route it should have had from the beginning. The real ending would come when the community stopped depending on property it never owned. The real ending would come when the road stopped being a controversy and became what it had always been. Mine. But before any of that happened, one final chapter remained. Because losing the presidency wasn't the only price Monica Pierce was about to pay. The weeks following the HOA vote were surprisingly quiet. No angry letters, no new demands, no social media campaigns about community access. Just paperwork. A lot of paperwork, which was exactly how Rachel preferred it. The settlement discussions started shortly after the audit results became public. By then, Cedar Ridge's new board had a very different attitude than the old one. They weren't interested in defending Monica's decisions. They were interested in limiting damage. That distinction mattered. The new board hired independent counsel, reviewed the records, reviewed the audit, reviewed the maintenance history. Then they reached the same conclusion everyone else had. The documents weren't on their side. A month later, representatives from the HOA sat across from Rachel and me in a conference room. The conversation was professional. No shouting, no threats, no drama. Just facts. Fence repairs, drainage damage, unauthorized use of private infrastructure, survey expenses, property restoration costs, years of accumulated consequences reduced to organized binders and supporting evidence, exactly the way Rachel liked it. By the end of negotiations, a settlement was reached. The HOA agreed to contribute funds toward repairs and restoration projects connected to the documented damage. The amount wasn't life-changing. That had never been the goal. The goal was accountability. And accountability finally arrived. The larger cost came from somewhere else. Access. Without Grayson Crossing, Cedar Ridge had only one legitimate entrance. The same entrance the original developers had tried to avoid expanding years earlier. Now they had no choice. Engineering studies were commissioned. Construction estimates were prepared. County reviews began. The price tag climbed quickly. Millions, not thousands, millions. Because shortcuts are often expensive once reality catches up. Over the next year, crews worked on the eastern access route that should have existed from the beginning. New grading, drainage improvements, bridge reinforcement, road widening. Everything necessary to create permanent legal access. Every dollar spent solving a problem that never would have existed if ownership had been respected from the start. Meanwhile, I focused on the ranch. The settlement funds helped repair sections of damaged fencing. Several drainage areas along Grayson Crossing were restored. The cracked culvert near the lower creek crossing was replaced entirely. A shoreline trail near the lake was rebuilt after years of unauthorized traffic. Little by little, the scars disappeared. The road began feeling like itself again. One afternoon, nearly a year after the gate closure, Ethan Brooks stopped by the ranch. We stood near the entrance looking down Grayson Crossing. Hardly any traffic, no confusion, no arguments, just a private road serving the property it was built to serve. Cedar Ridge finally opened the new entrance, he said. I heard. He smiled. People still talk about what happened. I'm sure they do. His expression became thoughtful. You know, most residents never blamed you. That surprised me less than he probably expected. Most homeowners had never been the problem. The problem had always been the story they were given. Ethan nodded toward the road. They just wanted the truth. So did I. After he left, I stood there for a while. Not because I was celebrating, because I was appreciating the silence. The kind of silence that had been missing for years. No delivery trucks. No contractors cutting across private land. No confusion about ownership. Just certainty. A few months later, the final sign went up beside the entrance. Simple. Clean. Impossible to misunderstand. Private ranch road access by written permission only. Only, no warnings. No explanations. No arguments. Just facts. The same facts that had existed all along. Late that evening, I walked down to the lake. The water reflected the last light of sunset. The road curved through the hills exactly as it had for decades. My father built it. My family maintained it. And despite everything that happened, it was still here. Still doing what it was meant to do. Serving the ranch. Serving the land. Serving home. Looking back, the most important lesson had nothing to do with HOAs, or lawsuits, or road closures. It was simpler than that, and home. People can repeat something for years. They can print it in newsletters. They can discuss it in meetings. They can vote on it. They can even convince entire communities to believe it. But none of those things create ownership. Records do. Deeds do. Boundaries do. The truth does. And eventually, the truth has a way of arriving whether people are ready for it or not. Monica Pierce learned that lesson the hard way. Cedar Ridge Estates learned it the expensive way. As for Grayson Crossing Road, it finally returned to what it had always been. Mine. And in the end, the land remembered exactly whose name was on the deed.
If there was lesson I take from this story, it's a problem rarely gets solved by being the loudest person in the room. They get solved by doing the hard, patient work of keeping records, knowing your rights, and staying steady when pressure starts building around you. West didn't win because he argued harder than anyone. He simply stood on the truth, documenting it, and gave people every opportunity to do the right thing before the facts finally spoke for themselves. There's something reassuring about us in a world where opinion can spread fast and assumption can become accepted as fast. The truth still matters. Boundaries matter. Responsibility matters. And sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay calm, stay respectful, and let the evidence carry the weight. I'd love to hear what you think. How do you ever deal with an HOA, a property dispute, or a situation where someone assumed they had rights they didn't actually have? Drop a yes in the comments if you have ever had to stand your ground, or share your story below. I read as many comments as I can, and they're often just as interesting as the story themselves. If you enjoyed this story about land, property rights, quiet determination, and everyday people standing firm with dignity, consider subscribing. We would love to have you here for the next story. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of your neighbors, and never underestimate the value of good records and an honest deed.